You know, I'm usually a pretty level-headed guy, but good lord did the next gen Unreal Engine 5 demo hype me up to levels unimaginable for these consoles. Like holiday 2020 could not come sooner in my head right now. But you know, all hype aside, if you happen to be new here, my name's Innocence and today I'm going to be taking a look at the PS5 tech demo that released yesterday and giving my 2 cents as to what all the information we got from it means for next gen, as well as pointing out a couple of things that you might have missed. If you haven't seen the tech demo yet, I don't know, maybe because you're living under a rock or something, I'll leave a link to it down below in the description, as well as put up an info card now so you could go watch it first and then come back to this video so I can explain everything that just happened. So before we start off, I'm going to be taking you through the demo a second time, taking all necessary stops to explain something or perhaps offer some insight. But anyways, without further ado, let's get straight into it. The real-time tech demo that reignited my hope for next gen.
This has to be the right way.
Okay, so I know that this was a quick stop, but there's something that you probably didn't notice here, and it's that this portion of the tech demo seems to be dynamically lit. When you look at the girl's eyes as she moves them, the light bounces just the same, as if to actually track the light source in her hand instead of, say, moving with her eyes. It really becomes obvious when she takes a step forward and her face seems to obstruct the light and cast a shadow on her scarf, which gets generated in real time. You can even see it when she puts the light away. As she makes it dimmer and drags it down, the light across her body mimics this exact motion and brightness, pretty much confirming that this demo is indeed 100% dynamically lit, as if you couldn't tell already. Epic has already come out and said that this demo did not use any hardware accelerated ray tracing whatsoever, which in my opinion is kind of hard to believe considering how damn good it looks. And I know what you must be thinking, Innocence, what's the difference between the global illumination they're using and actual ray tracing? And that's where things kind of get a bit weird. Traditionally, global illumination is a form of ray tracing, albeit a more intensive form of ray tracing that uses all sorts of light simulations and not just the one that we're still trying to master in real time, that being path tracing. But GI is still ray tracing nonetheless. And alright, if GI is actually ray tracing, why did they explicitly mention that it wasn't? Didn't they say that there was no hardware accelerated ray tracing in several interviews? And that's the key right there, you just said it yourself. There was no hardware accelerated ray tracing in the demo. And you might be like, okay, alright, smart guy, but didn't you just say that global illumination is more intensive than regular ray tracing? If that's the case, how did they manage to do it without using the dedicated hardware? And there's a simple explanation to that. Global illumination is ridiculously scalable, as in you can make it as intense or as non-intensive as you want it to be, depending on how many features of light that you actually want it to replicate. Meaning that if you remove some aspects of the feature set or simply turn down the number of light ray bounces on a per feature basis, you can actually get GI running on hardware that doesn't necessarily need to be specifically designed for ray tracing. In fact, your PS4 and Xbox One already use a form of global illumination called ambient occlusion. You might have heard of the term before. It basically simulates how objects react to ambient lighting. Sadly, that's about all your PS4 and Xbox One can manage before catching fire, but it just goes to show that global illumination can be used on a wide variety of hardware and at varying levels. And the global illumination we saw in the tech demo seemed to turn up its ray tracing to 11 without having to call in the PS5's big guns. And if you don't believe me, this is the only quote that you could find from the Epic developers on how the tech demo's rays were rendered. They said, hardware accelerated ray tracing will be supported in Unreal Engine 5, for example, but it's not a part of the PS5 tech demo revealed today. And there's that key phrase, hardware accelerated once again. Remember, the developers are trying to sell their engine to anyone who might be interested in using it. So basically what they're saying here is, look at the degree of global illumination, i.e. ray tracing, we've managed to produce without using the PS5's dedicated hardware. This shows that Unreal Engine 5 is more than capable of bringing out the best in your machine. So essentially, there is some form of ray tracing in this demo, but Epic wants to stress that Unreal Engine 5 makes it so that more ray tracing is possible with less. Excuse my long tangent, but I just wanted to clear up the misconceptions because I'm seeing a lot of outlets and YouTubers reporting that there was no ray tracing in the demo at all, when that's simply not the case. The development team even refers to light bounces several times throughout the video, which wouldn't really make sense outside the context of ray tracing. Like, this entire intro scene would not be possible without some degree of ray tracing. And global illumination gave Epic just the scalable tool that they needed to max out their engine's capabilities before they had to get extra hardware involved. And honestly, I think they achieved their goal. To achieve this, before using hardware ray tracing is pretty much the ultimate flex. But anyways, let's continue.
This has to be the right way.
So the next thing that we notice is that this demo is already gorgeous. Obviously, we've already watched the whole thing, so we know that it's due to its absolutely insane polygon count, about 1 polygon per pixel to be exact. Now, it has been confirmed that this demo was running on a PS5 at a dynamic resolution that hovered around 1440p 30fps, quote unquote, most of the time, which translates directly to 2560 by 1440, or roughly 3.68 million polygons that you can directly see that are being rendered per frame at any given point throughout the demo, which is to say, quite a lot more than what your current console could handle at this level of detail. I'd even argue a very much a lot more. And if you count the polygons that you can't directly see, like the ones being obstructed by other polygons, that number gets even more ridiculous. But let's continue.
Before we continue, let's stop a moment and take a look at some of the key features of this demo. Much of what you see was built with Quixel Megascan assets, but instead of using the game versions, we used the cinematic versions, which would typically only be used in film. There are around 1 million triangles each, and thanks to virtual texturing, they all use 8K textures as well.
Alright, so the developer just threw a lot of fancy words at us. Let's break them down a little bit. So he mentions Quixel Megascan assets. What are those? Well, if you've ever heard of stock photo vendors like Shutterstock, Quixel is kind of similar to them. They sell high quality 3D assets that could be used in a variety of game engines, like Unreal Engine for example. And their Megascan lineup is a set of 3D assets that have the highest level of detail possible and is traditionally intended for movie makers alone, because honestly using 1 million polygons and 8K textures to render a couple of rocks at a time is straight overkill. But luckily for us, Epic didn't seem to care. And if you wanted to, you could actually go to Quixel's website right now and inspect the exact same assets that they used to render this demo. I'll put a link in the description if it happens to pique your interest. But for now, let's continue.
Nanite can render an insane number of triangles very quickly. There are over 1 billion triangles of source geometry in each frame that Nanite crunches down losslessly to around 20 million drawn triangles. What does that many triangles look like? This isn't noise. These are the triangles, each a different color. Most are so small that they look like noise. Nanite achieves detail down to the pixel, which means triangles are often the size of pixels. This amount of geometric detail requires shadows to be pixel accurate as well, and Nanite can do that too.
Okay, so stopping one more time, the developers started talking about Nanite. What is it? Well, Nanite is Unreal Engine 5's custom micro polygon modeling algorithm. Try saying that 3 times fast. And not much is known about it besides what has just been described, but to give you a bit of context, it's pretty insane what Epic is claiming it can do. According to the developer, Nanite can take over 1 billion triangles of source material and use its algorithm to crunch them down to only 20 million that need to be rendered while still achieving the same level of detail. And to developers, that is an absolutely massive deal. That's over a 52 times increase in rendering efficiency without losing any detail, and it could be done on large scale scenes. That level of optimization was nowhere near expected to hit us anytime soon, and Nanite has kind of flown under the radar when it's a really interesting piece of tech. Like in my opinion, I was most blown away with just how much work Nanite is putting in behind the scenes, and quite frankly how it is the make or break backbone of this entire demo. The thing can even process polygons covered by shade and color them accordingly. Very impressive, but anyways, let's continue.
Speaking of lighting, all of the lighting in this demo is completely dynamic, with the power of Lumen that even includes multi-bounce global illumination. No light maps, no baking here. Without GI, all of that beautiful lighting is gone. With Lumen enabled, we can move the light and the bounce changes instantly.
Okay, so stopping here, I've pretty much explained to you what global illumination is in the beginning of the video and how it can be a really intensive form of dynamic lighting when you want it to be. So this section of the video was almost certainly a flex of Unreal Engine 5's Lumen, their custom global illumination algorithm. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, there are parts of this demo that are almost certainly ray traced to some degree, but just not hardware accelerated, and this valley is almost definitely one of them. The developer even mentions light bounces. It was also said in an interview that Lumen bounces light rays off of objects an infinite number of times until the light ray completely diffuses away, which is mind-boggling to say the least. That just goes to show how great Lumen is at taking a very intensive process like global illumination and optimizing it to the point where you can get scenes like this without enabling hardware accelerated ray tracing. And again, I think the biggest reason why the devs made sure to mention that hardware accelerated ray tracing wasn't enabled was to show off the capabilities of Lumen and show how it can essentially be ray tracing for almost all hardware without having to tap into the dedicated hardware just yet. Now you might ask, would the demo look better with full hardware ray tracing? And simply put, the answer is yes. Yes, it would. And it might even perform significantly better too. But remember, the goal of this demo wasn't to show off the PS5's hardware ray tracing, but to show off Unreal Engine 5 and what it can do on its own. But anyways, let's continue.
Okay, let's keep going. We've made some great additions to our audio system as well. Convolution reverb allows us to measure reverberation characteristics of real spaces, like actual caves that we sampled, and reproduce them in virtual spaces. Sound field rendering allows us to record and playback spatialized audio. All of this adds up to a more immersive experience.
Okay, so audio. This part is relatively straightforward. The developer mentions convolution reverberation, which is a tactic that has been around for quite a while now that basically uses software to simulate the reverberation or bounce of sound on objects by manually setting each object's acoustic characteristics. The developer mentions that they measured an actual cave to get the values that they implemented in this demo, which I'm sure was no easy feat, so hats off to them. Typically, convolution reverb was reserved for higher level productions like, once again, movies, and now it's made its way into Unreal Engine 5, with the aim of essentially giving us a simplified version of ray tracing but for audio. He also mentioned sound field rendering, which is a pretty complex process that aims to synthesize audio sources that will not change depending on your character's position, but simply just exist. As in, the game won't be coded to just play louder as you approach a sound source. The sound source will literally be simulated and react accordingly. No smokes, no mirrors, just sound. But now, let's continue.
This swarm of bats was created with our Niagara effects system. Particles in Niagara can now talk to one another and understand their environment like never before.
So here the developer mentions the Niagara effects system, and basically what this does is allow all particle-based renders like that of small pebbles, simple animals like bats or bugs, to be aware of one another and their environment in order to more accurately simulate a realistic behavior. For instance, if you pay close attention, not one of those bats collided or went through one another. They all carefully avoided a crash and fled the scene as fluidly as possible, making sure to avoid the hanging ropes and any potential obstacles on their way up.
We've also added a ton of new functionality to run fluid simulations like you see in the water below. The demo runs on our chaos physics system. Here we are using it to accurately simulate the rigid bodies of the falling rocks and the cloth of her scarf.
And here he mentions the chaos physics system, which is pretty straightforward. It handles anything that moves within Unreal Engine 5, assigning it certain physical properties that it will then use to react with the world accordingly. The concept for this type of tech has been around for as long as I've been alive, though I will admit that the team at Epic has severely upped the ante with the physics in this demo, and it's very amazing to see how lifelike everything feels. If you don't believe me, be sure to pay close attention to her scarf as we resume the demo.
Now that the environment is so complex, we've needed to greatly improve our animation systems to adapt. We've added predictive foot placement and motion warping, which dynamically modifies IK and body position to look more natural.
What the developer talks about here is also relatively straightforward. Basically what he says is, as the levels become more complex and realistic, with more ridges and more bumps and essentially more accuracy, the animations have to follow suit. Because it would be very awkward if we didn't have matching animations to this stunning world, and let's say every time our character took a step, it looked as robotic as it does in GTA, or part of her foot phased through the rocks every time she climbed a little. Essentially, poor animation in such an immersive world would really take you out of it.
For the character to more realistically interact with the environment, we've added the ability to trigger seamless contextual animation events, like her hand on the door.
Sounds promising.
Dynamic GI is amazing, not just for speeding up iteration, but also for its impact on gameplay.
Nice.
Any light source can move while
It
still
might
having
be.
beautiful bounce lighting. Dynamic illumination means specular as well, which you can see on all the metal surfaces. You can even see the Niagara-powered bugs reacting to the light. Lumen not only reacts to moving light sources, but also changes in geometry.
Yup, that's right, Lumen is always on all the time. It's not just a GI algorithm intended for predetermined light sources, it interacts with your environment as well. And a quick definition for those of you who might not have known the word, the dev mentions dynamic illumination and specular, which just means relating to or having the properties of a mirror or reflectivity.
Remember we mentioned high poly assets? This statue was imported directly from ZBrush and is more than 33 million triangles. No baking of normal maps, no authored LODs.
Okay, so this is actually my favorite part of the demo because I think it truly demonstrates the capabilities of Unreal Engine 5 and what that means for the next generation of hardware. As the dev mentioned, they pulled this statue straight from ZBrush, which is a digital sculpting tool where game devs, artists, and movie makers alike can go and create their profoundly detailed 3D models before exporting them to their medium of choice to begin work. The statue in this particular scene has been stated to have been directly imported from ZBrush, 33 million polygons in all, with no downscaling, a feat which is only possible because of Unreal Engine's Nanite algorithm. Truly impressive. The dev also mentions that the statue involves no baking of normal maps, and that essentially means that the statue is composed of polygons and polygons only, and that no other assets were used to increase its level of detail. Because typically for an asset with this many polygons, it would be significantly downscaled before being imported into the world. Then in the game development process, a normal map would be added to it, which would basically attempt to recapture some of the lost detail due to the severe downscaling. And what a normal map is just a 2D image with a certain texture pattern on it that can be mapped to a 3D object to create the optical illusion of a higher polygon count and therefore higher detail, kinda like this bird shoulder that I've been showing you. He also goes on to say, no authored LODs, and what this stands for is levels of detail, and is essentially how a game chooses to render objects in your field of view based solely on their position with respect to you. And it's a tactic that modern games use to save on resources. Take GTA for example. There are no loading screens in between any 2 points on the map, but you can be assured that your console isn't rendering what's across the map with the same level of detail that's right in front of you, if at all. That's a classic example of different levels of detail, but in it lies one fatal flaw that I'm sure you've definitely noticed if you've played GTA for long enough. It's that oftentimes, different textures need to be loaded in depending on how far you are away from an object. So if you move too quickly toward an object that was just classified as a low level of detail render, it might be a second or two before the texture and the normal map finally swap out to the higher detailed ones, producing a pretty jarring experience at times. What the dev wants to emphasize here is that Unreal Engine 5 has the capability to be completely rid of the LOD system by simply letting objects exist as is, high poly count and all. No smokes and mirrors as you move farther and closer, an object will simply just exist, which again is pretty mind-blowing. But let's continue.
And we can do more than a single statue. There are nearly 500 of that exact statue at the same detail level placed in this room, for a total of over 16 billion triangles from statues alone. Over this entire demo, there are hundreds of billions of triangles. So with Nanite, you have limitless geometry, and with Lumen, you have fully dynamic lighting and global illumination, all running on a PlayStation 5.
There's not much time left.
And this doesn't need to be constrained to small rooms. It can stretch all the way to the horizon.
I don't have anything technical to say about this besides the fact that Epic has single-handedly rekindled my excitement for next gen. This demo, this outside world on your screen is unfathomably beautiful, and there's not much else I can really say about it. I simply can't praise it enough if I tried. Now, do I expect for there to be games like this at launch? No. Simply put, no. I don't think there's a snowball's chance in hell we'll see any game come near this level of detail until at least 3 years into the generation because of two main reasons. Number one, the last generation is going to be bottlenecking us for quite some time until Sony and Microsoft decide to drop them. And number two, it's going to take some time for game devs to adapt to this new hardware and implement all these features in a practical way. Like, to make a game at this level of detail would probably take 4 years at a minimum, and developers have just started, if at all, working on games that will be exclusive to next generation only. So I wouldn't get my hopes up and expect this to be the standard going forward. That would just be unreasonable. But I'm also not going to agree with the people that say that this is just a tech demo and that we'll never be able to achieve this level of detail in an actual game. In my opinion, it's only a matter of time before the developers catch up to the hardware that's been given to them, and I fully anticipate that we might see at least one title like this, or at the very least very similar, within 3.5 years after launch. And assuming we get another mid-generation refresh not long after that, then the sky will truly become the limit. But enough said, let's watch the rest of this beauty.
The portal, it's open. Don't fail me now. It's time to see what's next.
So folks, that's going to bring us to the end of the video. If you like to give it a like, if you dislike the dislike, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification button, as well as share. And my brain is dying. Anyways, I've been Innocenceii, you've been the audience, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.